Champagne slammed into his face mid-note. The music collapsed. Laughter exploded from the front row. "Dance," a man shouted. "That's what you're here for." 2,000 people watched a black man stand under the lights, dripping, blinking through champagne, while the man who did it leaned back, smiling. Sammy Davis Jr. wiped his eyes and reached for the microphone. He was about to keep singing. "Because that's what you did. What would you have done? Stayed quiet and lived with it, or spoken up and paid for it?" That's when someone else stepped onto the stage, and the show stopped. Sammy didn't flinch. The whole room waited for him to break. The man walked out slowly, like he had nowhere else to be. No grin. No performance smile. Just a steady pace toward Sammy, stopping close enough that their shoulders touched. Dean Martin placed a hand on Sammy's back. Not dramatic. Not for the crowd. A simple, grounding weight. Dean didn't look at Sammy. He looked straight at the table. "Excuse me," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The kind of voice that didn't ask for attention because it assumed it. "Did you just do that to Sammy Davis Jr.?" Victor didn't even blink. "Yeah," he said. "I did." A ripple moved through the room. Everyone knew what Victor Duca was. Dean nodded once. "Why?" Victor shrugged. "Because it's funny. Because I paid good money to be entertained. And watching your little..." "Stop." Dean didn't raise his voice. "Don't finish that sentence." Victor's smile tightened. "You telling me what to do?" "I'm telling you what you're not going to do," Dean said. "You're not going to humiliate him. Not here." The air changed. This wasn't banter. This was real. Victor leaned forward. "You know who you're talking to?" Dean met his eyes. "Yeah, I do." A pause. Long enough to feel dangerous. "And right now," Dean continued, "you're just a man who threw champagne at Sammy Davis Jr. Victor laughed, sharp and humorless. "You got nerve." Dean nodded. "That's true." Another pause. "You're going to apologize to him," Dean said. "Right now. If you knew the man you were confronting could ruin you, would you still draw the line?" The room inhaled as one. Victor stared, searching Dean's face for the joke. There wasn't one. Or what? Dean didn't answer immediately. He glanced at the band. At Sammy. At the audience holding its breath. Then back to Victor. "Or the show stops," Dean said. "Everyone gets their money back. And tomorrow morning, every paper in America prints why." Victor stood. The scrape of his chair cut through the silence. He was taller than Dean. Broader. Used to rooms parting when he moved. Dean didn't step back. "This doesn't end well for you," Victor said quietly. Dean nodded again. "Maybe." He shifted closer to Sammy, unmistakably. "But it ends right for him." Victor looked around the room. 2,000 faces. No laughter now. Only witnesses. The power had shifted. Everyone could feel it. Dean spoke once more. "Apologize," he said. "Or we're done." Victor's jaw clenched. And for the first time that night, he hesitated. Victor Duca stayed standing. For a long second, it looked like he might choose violence. Not here, not openly, but later. Everyone in the room understood how men like him worked. Pride was currency. Disrespect demanded payment. Sammy felt it before he saw it. That familiar tightening in his chest. The instinct to step in. To soften it. To save everyone from what came next by swallowing one more humiliation. He shifted his weight, barely perceptible. Dean felt it. Dean tightened his hand on Sammy's back. "No," the gesture said. "Not this time." Victor's eyes flicked to Sammy. Not with apology. With calculation. He was deciding whether this man, this soaked, silent performer, was worth the trouble Dean Martin was making him. Around the room, people sat perfectly still. Glasses paused halfway to mouths. No one coughed. No one whispered. The band hadn't moved. The instruments rested like props from another world. Victor exhaled through his nose. "You're making a mistake," he said. Dean didn't blink. "Then it's mine to make." Another beat. Victor's crew shifted in their seats. One of them glanced toward the exits. Another stared hard at the stage, jaw clenched. They were waiting for a signal. A nod. A permission. It didn't come. Instead, Victor did something no one at that table expected. He turned fully toward Sammy. The room leaned forward. "I apologize," Victor said. The words landed flat. Quiet. Barely audible beyond the front rows. Dean didn't move. "Louder." Victor's eyes snapped back to him. Rage flared there, hot, immediate. But Dean didn't step back. He didn't soften. He simply waited. Victor clenched his jaw and raised his voice. "I apologize to Mr. Davis," he said. "What I did was inappropriate. It won't happen again." The silence afterward was heavier than the tension before. Dean turned slightly. "Sam." All eyes shifted to Sammy. He stood there, champagne drying on his sleeves, collar damp, face calm by habit. But inside, something had cracked open. Not anger. Relief. He nodded once. "I accept." Was this courage? Or recklessness disguised as loyalty? The room exhaled. Dean faced Victor again. "Good." Victor started to sit. "Not yet," Dean said. Victor froze. "You and your friends can stay," Dean continued. "Or you can leave. But if anyone at that table so much as breathes wrong for the rest of the night, you're all out." A pause. "And Victor," Dean added almost casually, "if I ever hear you pulled something like that with another performer in this town, anywhere, I'll make sure every stage goes quiet when you walk in." That landed harder than a threat. Victor stared at him. Long measuring. Then he nodded once. Sharp. Final. He sat. The men with him followed. Subdued. Smaller somehow. Dean turned toward the band. "From the top," he said. The piano came in softly. Sammy stepped back to the microphone. For a moment, he just stood there. Then he sang. The first note was steadier than before. Lower. Grounded. Something in it had changed. The song wasn't lighter. It was heavier. Weighted with everything that had just happened. He sang through the last trace of humiliation. Through the anger he'd buried his whole life. Through the unfamiliar feeling of being defended when he hadn't asked to be. When he finished, the room erupted. Not polite applause. Not celebrity clapping. A standing ovation. If this moment hit you, let me know in the comments. I read every one. People rose as one. Some cheering. Some crying. Some stunned. It went on, rolling over the stage like a wave Sammy couldn't outrun even if he tried. Dean stood beside him, saying nothing. Backstage later, the noise still bleeding through the walls, Sammy found Dean alone, loosening his tie. His hands shook slightly now that no one was watching. "Dean," Sammy said. Dean looked up. "Hell of a song." "You didn't have to do that," Sammy said. Dean shrugged. "Yeah, I did." Sammy swallowed. You know what that could cost you. Dean met his eyes. Tired. Certain. I know, he said. A beat. But I couldn't live the other way. Sammy stepped forward and hugged him. Tight. Longer than either would have admitted to anyone else. Years later, when Sammy would struggle to speak, that night would still come out clear. Not the champagne. Not the fear. The hand on his back that said, "You're not alone." By morning, the story had moved faster than the hangovers. It traveled through kitchens and corridors, through elevators and loading docks, through the places where performers whispered and staff listened. By noon, everyone in Las Vegas who mattered knew the same thing. Dean Martin had stopped the show. Not figuratively. Literally. He'd looked at Victor Duca, connected, feared, protected, and made him apologize to Sammy Davis Jr. in front of a packed room. No fists. No shouting. Just refusal. Just pressure. Just witnesses. Victor left town the next day. Quietly. No farewell dinners. No return dates. His absence did more talking than any headline ever could. Men who used to treat black performers like furniture suddenly became polite. Careful. Eyes up. Jokes swallowed before they were born. Because if Dean Martin would do that, on stage, under lights, what else might he do? Sammy noticed the difference first. Rooms changed when he walked in now. Not completely. Not magically. But something had shifted. The air held a pause where there hadn't been one before. A calculation. How far can I go? Sometimes, Sammy caught Dean watching him from across a room. Not protective. Not proud. Present. They didn't talk about that night much. They didn't need to. The bond had moved past explanation. Past gratitude. Past favors. It was family now. Years rolled on. Shows blurred together. Cities. Applause. Smoke-filled rooms and long drives between them. The Rat Pack stayed loud in public, reckless on purpose, but in quieter moments there was a gravity underneath. Sammy carried that night with him. Is dignity something you're born with? Or something someone has to show you you're allowed to have? Not like a wound. Like armor. When he was insulted later, and he still was, he felt the difference between enduring and accepting. He could endure. He refused to accept. Dean aged differently. The bravado never fully left, but it thinned. The drinking slowed. The silences got longer. He didn't regret what he'd done, not once, but he understood the cost better as time passed. Every choice has a shadow. In the late 80s, when Sammy's voice began to betray him, when doctors spoke in careful tones and avoided timelines, he asked for Dean. They sat together in Sammy's living room, the lights low, the world finally quiet. No audience. No suits. No stage between them. Do you remember that night? Sammy asked. Dean smiled faintly. Which part? The champagne. Dean nodded. Hard to forget. Sammy's voice was rough now. My whole life, I was trained to take it. Smile through it. Don't make waves. Dean listened. That night, Sammy continued, you didn't let me take it. You didn't ask me if I wanted help. You just stepped in. Dean looked down at his hands. I didn't save your pride, Sammy said. I saved my belief that I deserved one. Dean swallowed. You didn't owe me that, Sammy added. Dean shook his head once. You were my brother. That's not owing. Sammy smiled. Tired. Grateful. You know, he said, after that night, I stopped pretending I had dignity. Dean looked up. I started believing it. The room went quiet. Time did what it always does. Sammy Davis Jr. died in May of 1990. At the funeral, Dean Martin stood older than his years. Smaller. The swagger gone. When he spoke, it wasn't as a legend or a star. It was as a man who'd lost family. People expected stories, jokes, charm. Dean gave them one night. He told them about champagne and silence, about refusing to move, about calling another man his brother when it would have been easier to look away. He paused once, mid-sentence. They ask why I did it, Dean said. Why I took that risk. He looked out at the room. There wasn't a choice. Afterward, as the crowd drifted away, Dean stayed seated, alone. Long after he was supposed to leave. The lights dimmed, the stage, finally empty. And somewhere in that quiet, the cost of standing up settled in, not as regret, but as memory. Years after the lights went out and the applause faded, people still asked about that night. They asked because the Rat Pack had become mythology. Songs, tuxedos, jokes sharpened by whiskey and timing. They wanted the legend to end the way legends usually do. Loud, triumphant, clean. But the truth of it was quieter. Dean Martin never talked about Victor Duca again. Not publicly. Not privately. The man disappeared from conversation the same way he disappeared from Vegas, without ceremony. Whatever consequences followed didn't matter to Dean. He hadn't acted to win. He'd acted because something in him refused to step aside. That refusal aged with him. As the years passed, Dean performed less. The laughter came easier for the audience than it did for him. He carried himself with the same looseness, but the weight underneath was real now. Choices calcify with time. You don't forget the ones that mattered. Especially the ones that cost you. Sometimes, when someone brought up Sammy, Dean would smile and say, "Hell of a talent." Nothing more. He didn't say brother out loud much anymore. He didn't have to. The night at the Sands never became a headline lesson. No plaques. No speeches carved into stone. But performers remembered. Word traveled the way it always does in places like that. Through glances, through pauses, through what men decided not to do anymore. Dignity doesn't spread loudly. It spreads carefully. Dean understood that by the end. He'd learned it not on a stage, but in the quiet rooms afterward. In the moments when applause is gone and you're left alone with what you chose to be. At Sammy's funeral, Dean stood at the podium longer than expected. He didn't rehearse. He didn't perform. He spoke like someone speaking to one person. Sammy and I came from different worlds, he said. That didn't matter. He paused. His hands trembled slightly. What mattered, he continued, was that when it counted, we didn't leave each other standing alone. People listened. Some cried. Some nodded. Some didn't fully understand. That was okay. Dean stepped down and returned to his seat. He didn't stay for long after. Slipped out before the crowd thinned. Before anyone could ask him to explain. He never explained. In the years that followed, Dean Martin faded the way men who've lived fully often do. Not dramatically, not bitterly. Just quieter. The rooms he entered no longer stopped. The laughter came later, if at all. But something stayed with him. The knowledge that one night, when it mattered, he didn't look away. That he chose discomfort over silence. Risk over ease. Brotherhood over safety. That he placed a hand on another man's back and said without saying it, "You don't face this alone." There are moments that define careers. Do you think Dean Martin did the right thing that night? Or did he cross a line? And then there are moments that define character. Dean Martin's wasn't sung. It wasn't recorded. It wasn't even applauded at first. It happened in a pause. In a refusal. In a decision made under lights, in front of witnesses, with no guarantee of how it would end. Sammy once said that night gave him something he didn't know he was allowed to have. Dean never argued. He carried that truth with him to the end. Not as pride, not as legacy, but as something settled. Something quiet. Because long after the music stopped, long after the danger passed, long after the names faded into history, there was still that moment. Standing under the lights. When one man chose another. And did not move.